The History of Ballet from 1416 to 1948. Dance is one of the oldest of the arts. It consists of structured movement of the human body, which is the basis of all existence, and, just like walking, is distinct to human beings. Dancing describes the simple joy of physical movement. Rhythmic movement represents a natural response to emotions and to the world around us. The highest form of movement becomes the perfect blending of abstraction and the human mind. Blending intellect, emotion, discipline, and spontaneity, ballet combines spirituality and intrinsically artistic values. The Beginnings of Ballet. The word ballet appeared to originate in 1416. Domenico di Pazienza wrote on the art of dancing and conducting dances, where he described the components of various dances. He named 4 types of dance in accelerating tempos, from slow to quick: basse danse, quadrillina, salterio, and piva. Although nowadays the language of ballet is in French, originally it was in Italian. During the Renaissance, there were huge pageants where dancers were both members of the aristocracy and hired performers. These occasions were often used to impress the nobility of the neighboring states. During this era, dancers wore contemporary court fashions: wigs and bloomers for men, and heavy long-skirted gowns for women. Some people consider the first ballet took place in 1489 at a banquet in Italy directed by Pergonzi de Botta. Each course of the meal was heralded with a dance called an entrée. On at least one occasion, the scenes and stage machinery were constructed by Leonardo da Vinci. In 1490, da Vinci designed an extravaganza to entertain the Duke of Milan. In keeping with his genius, the presentation was based on astronomy. The ancient Greek concept of the cosmic dance was incorporated into the Renaissance worldview. The motions of the dancers were understood to mirror the harmony and order of the celestial bodies. Although during the 1400s there were men who were considered to be the earliest ballet masters, most historians believe the performance of the Ballet Comique de Lorraine at the Palais du Petit Bourbon in Paris in 1581 was the birth of ballet. Balthazar de Boischouillou staged the ballet in front of an audience of 10,000 people for the Queen Louise of France. The drama lasted for 5 hours. When Fabrizio Caruso published Ballerino, Italy became the world center for ballet. In 1700, Chorégraphie ou l'art d'écrire la danse was published by Raoul Augur Fioulé in France. The word choreography, when translated, became choreography and is derived from the Greek chorea, which means to dance, and graphein, which means to write. By 1700, many of the words and movements common in today's ballet were already in use, including jeté, sisson, chassé, entrechat, pirouette, and cabriole. In 1713, the Paris Opera established its own dance school, which taught a technique based on the work of Feuillet's writings. Ballet De Court. When Catherine de' Medici married the King of France, Henry II, In 1553, she introduced Ballet De Court, or the court ballet, to the court of France during the 16th century. The main characteristic of Ballet de Court was the starring roles were performed by the highest figures of the land. At first, these were usually masked extravaganzas with costumed courtiers and dancing. Initially, the dances were complex, with elaborate floor patterns and step sequences. Although the technique required excellent balance and control, dress limited the possibilities of the movement. Shoes worn for early ballet were often specifically designed but usually followed current court fashion. This was true for both men and women. Men's fashion for long-toed shoes hampered their ability to move freely, as did the fashion for long, wide-sleeved gowns. Hence, arm and foot positions became important. Women wearing heavy dresses were unable to develop their footwork. Flexible soles allowed for small springing steps, but the raised heels restricted the possibility of jumping. Eventually, a codified vocabulary of steps emerged. King Louis XIV loved dancing and starred in many court productions. He appeared in Ballet de la Nuit, dressed as the Sun King, and henceforth became known as the Sun King. Louis XIV wore high-heeled shoes with massive gilt sun buckles, complete with rays. Men's clothing was now fitted for dancing, but their high-heeled shoes limited the possibilities. When Louis XIV became too old to participate, he founded the Académie Royale de Danse. Later, this became the Paris Opera Ballet, and up until 1681, all female roles were danced by young men. Pierre Beauchamp became the ballet master for Louis and is credited with the establishment of classical ballet's 5 positions, and he stressed technical steps and movements. The phrase, minding your P's and Q's, may have had its origins where the dance masters would caution their pupils to mind their pieds, feet, and the Q's, which would be the tails of their wigs, when they took to the floor. As was appropriate at the time, dancers would greet each other by bowing. Too low of a bow would result in the embarrassment of losing your wig. Ballet de Court were iconic court spectacles held in the early 17th century France. They combined poetry, the visual arts, music, and dance, and mirrored the passions and concerns of aristocracy society from its beginnings in 1581 with the Ballet Comique de la Reine. Under the guise of entertainment, it addressed the issue of power and exalted the grandeur of the monarch. The entire court was obligated to either participate or attend. Public performances were put on from the late 1620s, initiated by Cardinal Richelieu. The genre became an essential propaganda tool and helped create a real royal mythology using political and allegorical themes. Professional dancers. Professional dancers begin to appear in 1630 and by 1659 were well established. In 1672, Jean-Baptiste Lully formed a dance academy within the Académie Royale de Musique. That dance company survives today as the Paris Opera Ballet. Dancing was used to political effect towards establishing the dominance of the French court. The fashion for court entertainment and the French style spread across Europe. With the emergence of professional dancers, they influenced technique and moved dance towards an expressive art form that was accessible to a broad audience. The developing middle class meant a public existed with money that could be spent on leisure pursuits such as attending theaters. As the art form advanced with more dance and less speaking, it became more attractive to paying audiences. As professional dancers were evolving movement techniques appropriate to new audiences, choreographers were adapting their work to new spaces. In the Paris Opera and the many new theaters that appeared at the end of the 18th century, the perspective of the audience was radically changed. Instead of performing in a space surrounded by an audience on three sides, sometimes seated in raised galleries, dancers were now separated from their audiences and framed by a proscenium arch. Movement was now viewed in the frontal plane, which replaced floor patterns as the most visible spatial effect. Technically, the use of soft, flat shoes by professional dancers allowed them to explore a range of movement different from that used in court dances. Jumps replaced the small springing steps, and elevation became more and more important. An ironic tragedy was Lully died in 1687 as a result of a self-inflicted injury he received by accidentally stabbing his foot with his time marking stick during a performance of Te Deum. The wound festered and the foot became gangrenous, and Lully died of blood poisoning. Ballet d'Action. Ballet d'Action was the name given to dance without masks. English dance master John Weaver was thought to have choreographed the first performance in 1717 of a ballet with no spoken words. Ballet d'Action might well have died with Weaver if it had not been for Italian Gaspero Angiolilli and the French-Swiss Jean-Georges Noverre. Both Angiolilli and Noverre pursued the Ballet d'Action on their own. Ballets were now performed on stage, and although contemporary society was still uncomfortable with female performers, gradually came the emergence of the star dancer, which was usually a danseuse. By the late 17th century and early 18th centuries, women were becoming more accepted, and Mademoiselle de La Fontaine was the first recorded lady dancer at the Paris Opera. Although very little was written about her, she was hailed as the Queen of Dance and was very much admired for her elegance and style. When she retired, she became a nun. By 1720, Marie Camargo raised her hemline to show her footwork, as she was considered so spectacular as to be compared to the footwork of men. She became famous for her ability to portray character and ability to interact dramatically with her partner. Camargo, or La Camargo as she was known, pursued pure dance. In the solo, she concentrated on jumps and developed the beating steps, or batterie. Madame Camargo had small feet, and her small shoes became the vogue of court. Her shoemaker became incredibly popular. Ballerinas had to wear calçons de précaution, so that the audience would not see anything inappropriate, which in those days was anything above the ankle. About 1730, danse haut superseded danse basse, and dancers began to leap, hop, and jump. Opera ballet. During the 17th century, ballet was most often performed in the same productions as opera. This was known as opera ballet. When the ballet composer L'Europe Galante suggested making the dance sequences longer as well as shortening the skirts of the female dancers, ballet became increasingly popular. In 1735, when Rameau put on an opera ballet called Les Indes Galantes, the dancers were definitely doing ballet, as the ballroom and dance forms were now recognized as separate. The turning out of the legs, which had been originally to display the buckles of the shoes, became much more important in ballet. With the French Revolution came a fashion revolution in ballet. Costumes were much lighter, and women dancers wore light, flowing dresses with a cut similar to the French Empire line, and both male and female dancers wore soft, flexible footwear. Pre-Romantic Era. As ballet entered the 19th century, it was in a state of transition known as the pre-Romantic phase. During the pre-Romantic era, male dancers reached their peak, and ballerinas first started dancing on the very tips of their toes, or en pointe. The earliest record of dancing en pointe is a photo of Fanny Biat en pointe. It is possible Genevieve Gosselin was en pointe in 1815, but there is no photographic evidence to support this. The danseuse traditionally credited with being the first dancer to dance en pointe was the Italian Marie Taglioni, and records support that she was en pointe when she was 18 years old. In 1832, her father choreographed La Cephide for her to perform. Her bell-shaped dress with a footed and boned bodice became the forerunner on which the romantic tutu was built 50 years later. The Italian School of Ballet. The Italian school was known for athleticism, and dancers like Cicchetti developed powerful calves and thighs. They pushed technique to the limit in order to achieve dazzling virtuistic works. The Italians mastered spotting. English Ballet. At first, the entire story was portrayed through dance and pantomime, but after 1735, greater attention was paid to ballet. From the early 18th century, England became the place where foreign ballet dancers performed in front of rich patrons. It was not until the early part of the 20th century, however, before English ballet dancers contributed to the art form. In the last century, Margot Fonteyn was a major dancer and became the focus of world attention for almost 30 years. Romantic Era. In the Romantic Era in the 19th century, ballet stories told of fairies, sylphs, and other unreal creatures that tempted humans from their real lives into fantasies of otherworldly happiness. Subsequently, emphasis on vertical posture and airborne movement became critical as ballerinas expressed their ethereal characters by dancing on the tips of their toes. Although they wore shoes, the danseuses would imagine they were barefoot and performed as if they themselves could fly. Dancers appeared to move with elongated legs and feet, with only the most tenuous connection to the ground. With the reasonably new skill of dancing en pointe improving, the ballerinas ruled the Romantic Era and became the objects of public adulation. From the Romantic period onwards, point dancing became a tradition of ballet, which was considered to be essential to storytelling. In the telling of supernatural stories, the danseuses dancing had to convey supernatural weightlessness to make the character more convincing. As a fairy or sylph, the ballerina used her points to flit as if by magic about the stage. The Romantic Age was transfixed with beauty, passion, with natural and supernatural things, and the power of love. The great ballets of the time were always passionate but tragic encounters between a mortal terrestrial man and a supernatural female. The female characters were usually inhabitant of the supernatural world and always depicted as a woman not bound to the earth, so dainty she could balance on a flower petal. In their less ornate costumes, the feminine purity and virtue could be seen. The effectiveness of rising on points underlined the ethereal lightness and otherworldly grace. Point dancing was not another virtuosic feat. Instead, it was a deliberate means of enhancing the female role. The dominance of women was partly due to changes in social attitude towards women and partly to a technical invention, the point shoe. The heeled shoe was slowly replaced by heelless slippers. The now stiffened toe box allowed the ballerina to become airborne and, when combined with leaps and poses, completed the mirage. By the middle of the century, the fires of the Romantic Ballet had begun to pass in London and Paris. What started as an expressive art form began to turn into a variety of vaudeville, a convenient and agreeable excuse for the display of feminine charm. The Russian School of Ballet. In 1738, the Russian monarchy established the St. Petersburg School, the world's second oldest ballet academy. The Empress Catherine of Russia took the French ballet to St. Petersburg, but it was Marius Pepita that brought the French school to Russia. The Russians emphasized refinement and preserved the integrity of ballet during the 19th century. Pepita perfected the full-length evening-long story ballet that combined set dances with mimed scenes. His best-known works were Sleeping Beauty and Swan Lake, both set to commissioned scores by Peter Tchaikovsky. In Russia, opera houses were under the direct control of the Tsar, and hence productions were paid from the imperial funds. During this time, dancers became part of the imperial household. Prior to the revolution, Russian ballet reverted to reflect superiority and grandeur. This changed, and post-revolution People's Commissar for Enlightenment allowed ballet as long as it was light and uplifting. At first, through necessity and lack of talented dancers, local folk dancers were introduced. This meant dancing styles were more robust and incorporated athletic style, especially for male dancers. Dancers needed new, stronger shoes, and shoemakers made harder shoes to replace them. By now, the Russian ballet had surpassed the French ballet, and many Russian dancers had become international stars. The most notable ballerina of this time was Anna Pavlova. She maintained the ideal of balancing on the smallest, pointiest tip, and it is reported that she had her photographs retouched to remove some of the platform tip. In 1907, Mikhail Fokine put on a Greek-style ballet entitled Eunice and made the dancers look like they were in bare feet by having toes painted on the dancers' shoes. Until then, it was against the rules of the Imperial Theater for performers to dance with bare feet or bare legs. A new dance company, the Ballet Russe, was formed in 1909 by Sergei Diaghilev. When Diaghilev brought Russian ballet to Western Europe, the decor, costumes, and music were as important as the dance itself. American Ballet. The School of American Ballet was established in 1934, and within a decade, George Balanchine had formed the Ballet Society. Because the costumes for the premiere performance were very constricting, they were discarded and the dancers danced in what could be called rehearsal costumes. This allowed the audience to see the full dance. The look caught on and was instantly recognized in Balanchine's ballets. The choreographer gave his name to the stereotypical slim body we now associate with ballet dancers. Achieving the Balanchine body has unfortunately led to many eating disorders in ballerinas. In 1948, the Ballet Society caught the attention of the New York City's Center Theatre, who invited the Ballet Society to work alongside the New York City Opera in the theater. This was the beginning of the New York City Ballet. You can help us get the word out. Give us a like, subscribe, follow, and share.